How many of you remember that?
This
Beatles?
is Charlotte MacFee.
Okay, how many of you remember that Beatles song, The Long and Winding Road? Well, it's never been one of my favorite Beatles songs, but, and I never certainly thought that it was a particularly spiritual song. But when I came across the lyrics not too long ago, I thought, wow, this pretty much describes my life. Being in my 80s, it's certainly been a long road, but the winding part I had to think about. I was born and raised in a very loving family, all believers, several generations back. Although my parents were divorced when I was only a year old, I never knew my father. That didn't bother me too much when I was growing up. My mother and I lived with my grandparents. My mother never said unpleasant things about my father again. During a 4-month separation, our daughter and I lived with my mother. And during this time, I began attending a New Age church, reading many of their recommended books. The separation ended with a reconciliation, and we ultimately joined my husband to tour Europe for about 6 months. This was very educational, but something was still missing. I thought it was the grounding one feels when one lives in a community, and you don't have that connection when you're living in a foreign country. We eventually moved back to the Bay Area. Hubby got a job with a commercial real estate company. We bought a house, had our second child, a son, and I thought things were going okay. However, I still had that feeling, is this all there is? I can still remember a time when our family went on vacation together, and the heat of a religious discussion one night, I adamantly proclaimed, I am not a sinner. I still hadn't figured out what was missing. Our marriage finally ended up towards the end of the 70s, when it was evident to me that his loyalties were elsewhere. I had been lied to and felt not only betrayed, but that my insides were being wrenched from my very being. When we finally decided to divorce, I had so many uncertainties. Where would we live? What would we live on? At that time I had no job. And what would we do? I wonder if any of you have ever had those uncertain feelings. But God had a plan for us. We separated. The children lived with me. I got a part-time job and ultimately went back to grad school to get a master's in communicative disorders. We stayed in the family home. The kids continued in their local schools and kept their friendships. I ultimately was hired by the local school district as a speech pathologist, and therefore was able to have the same vacations as the kids had. I found my way to another New Age church, which I thought at the time would fill the void I had often felt. I took classes, prayed, read their devotionals, attended church regularly, and thought I was maybe on the right path. Although we hadn't taken the children to church as little ones, I did try to raise them with godly principles, giving them the foundation they needed to make good decisions for their own lives. Later on, as adults, both of them individually came to Christ of their own choosing. And I knew then that God had known them in my womb. Winding back to that long road through mutual friends and neighbors, I met and then married my life partner, Jim, to whom I've now been married 32 years. He has a healthy respect and appreciation for God, which I recognize immediately, and is a kind and intelligent man. Early in our marriage, both his daughter and mine accepted Jesus as their Savior. Each of them used to share with me this wonderful, fulfilling, exciting relationship they each had with Jesus, and I knew then that that's what I was missing and was so longingly looking for. When it finally dawned on me, I realized that Jesus had always been there with me. I just needed to knock on the door. So many examples in my life show me that while I was winding around, God had not only made crooked places straight for me, but had used them for good. I could have viewed my first marriage as an unpleasant experience, but I had 2 wonderful God-fearing children from that marriage, and look what they've been able to teach me. With my current marriage, we have been able to build a strong, blended family, and no, not everything is perfect, but now both my husband and I are confident that God does use everything for good, and he never leaves us. We recently moved to the Dallas area, It was a difficult move, having lived in Washington State for over 20 years. We had to leave many good friends, beautiful countryside with gorgeous mountains, and a comfortable lifestyle. But I realized that with our advancing age, we needed to be closer to family. 3 of our 6 children and 7 of our 13 grandchildren live here in the Dallas area, and I felt God was calling us to be in Dallas. Besides, my loving grandfather had been born in Paris, Texas. My husband had been going through some health challenges, so I needed help with that move, and boy, did God answer that call. Many friends stepped up to help sort, toss, pack our things. The logistics of movers and packers, a car transporter, etc. all went very smoothly. God was with us the whole way. Did I mention the lyrics to that song? The long and winding road that leads to the door will never disappear. I've seen that road before. For most of my life, I've known that I needed God. There have been times when I didn't go to Jesus for my answers, but after I realized my mistake, often I would get myself into a funnel. And then I'd realize, whoops, Jesus, I need Jesus right now. And I rely on him continuously now. Often he sends me to a quiet area, gives me a poke, or other subtle message. Other times he'll rearrange things to make the crooked place straight. I remember several times when I was an administrator in special ed, some days would be way overbooked and I would become overwhelmed. But when I would take a moment to ask God for his assistance, he would sometimes cancel a meeting, rearrange the schedule, or just move things around so that particular day was not so stressful. I realize now that God has always loved me, even though I've sinned, done things I shouldn't have, and said things that were hurtful to others. I'm very sorry for all of this, but I believe I have been forgiven, and I try to forgive myself. I believe Jesus is the Son of God. He died for our sins, he rose from the dead, and now sits on the right hand of God. I would like to invite you to knock on that door and discover for yourself